The most luxurious restaurant downtown was packed that afternoon. Tables covered in white tablecloths, silver cutlery reflecting the golden light of the chandelier, waiters gliding like discreet shadows. It was the perfect setting for million-dollar negotiations, but also the stage for the greatest humiliation of his life. The secretary adjusted her glasses and straightened her posture. Her heart was pounding, but she believed this lunch could be her chance to be heard, to show she had ideas beyond the notes in her diaries. The plate before her remained untouched, decorated only with a sprig of rosemary. The executives at the table laughed loudly, exchanged inside jokes, and clinked glasses of wine. Yet no one glanced at her. The boss, busy impressing his colleagues, didn't even introduce his own secretary. She was as if she were invisible, a voiceless shadow. With every passing minute, the golden clock on the wall seemed to mock her. The hands dragged, marking the distance between what she dreamed of achieving and the reality of being merely a figurehead. The sound of laughter grew more and more distant, as if coming from another world. When the main course arrived, the discomfort turned to pain. She tried to begin a sentence, but her voice was lost in the hubbub. One of the executives interrupted her without even looking up. The lump in her throat grew until it choked her. Suddenly, she realized she was alone. Everyone had risen to head to another table, ignoring her presence like someone abandoning an old umbrella. The waiter looked at her with pity, removing their plates without a word. She took a deep breath, but the air felt too heavy. She grabbed her bag, stood quickly, and walked to the side hallway, fighting back the tears that were already threatening to fall. Her heels echoed on the marble floor, each step quickening. He found a dark corner near the service door. There, away from judgmental eyes, he let his body collapse against the cold wall. The tears came without asking permission, shattering the silence of the hallway like shattered glass. In that moment, all her frustrations came together. Years of dedication ignored, sleepless nights wasted, dreams swallowed by anonymity. She felt small, invisible, as if the world had decided she would never be more than a footnote in other people's stories. But little did she know that very night, her weeping would be witnessed, and that someone, the last person she expected, would see not weakness in her tears, but the spark of a hidden strength, capable of turning destinies upside down. The hallway behind the restaurant felt like another world. There were no sparkling crystals or rehearsed laughter, just worn walls and a dim light bulb that flickered, casting nervous shadows. The floor smelled of cheap detergent mixed with the distant scent of fried food. This was where she sought refuge. Leaning against the cold wall, she let her body slide to the floor. Her previously restrained tears now escaped in ragged sobs. She ran her hand over her eyes, smearing her makeup even further, but it didn't matter. For the first time in a long time, there was no audience to judge. Her breath came in short, almost suffocated gasps. Each sigh seemed to bring back memories of all the times she'd been ignored in meetings, treated as invisible, or remembered only when someone needed coffee. The echo of emptiness pounded loudly within her chest. She glanced at her phone screen, still glowing with notes from lunch. Strategies, numbers, projections, all ready to impress. Now those words seemed ridiculous, useless traces of a dream shattered in seconds. The distant sound of dishes clanging in the kitchen reached her, mixed with the voices of hurried staff. But in that small corner, time seemed to stand still. The world outside continued to move, but inside her, only the weight of silence remained. He tried to compose himself, smoothing back the loose strands of hair. But with each attempt to lift his face, more tears insisted on falling. It was like fighting an unstoppable tide. For the first time, he allowed himself to be weak. Her hands trembled as she held her bag in her lap. She clutched the handle like an anchor, trying to hold on to something that wouldn't crumble. Inside the bag, she hid a notebook filled with personal notes, dreams, and sketches of ideas she'd never shared with anyone. The hallway became a mirror of her own life. Forgotten, erased, used only when convenient. No one chose that path except by chance. And in a way, She felt that way too, part of a script that never gave her prominence. How many people around us are living stories like this, unseen? If you believe they deserve to be told, like this video and subscribe to the channel to hear more moving stories. For a few minutes, she closed her eyes. She wanted to disappear, let the world spin without her. But a strange feeling grew inside her chest. What if this wasn't the end, but simply the point at which everything would change? The sound of firm footsteps approached. Unlike those of the hurried waiters, they were measured, confident, and full of authority. Without realizing it, her refuge was no longer so empty. Someone had found their way to her tears. Footsteps approached, breaking the heavy silence of the hallway. She kept her eyes closed, praying it was just a lost waiter. But the shadow that fell over her was too firm, too imposing, to be casual. When she opened her eyes, she found her boss standing before her. His suit was impeccable, his Swiss watch gleaming in the dim light, his posture one of constant control. But in that moment, what weighed most heavily wasn't his presence, but the contrast between them. She, sitting on the cold floor, her eyes red and her makeup smeared. He, erect like a marble statue, never having let a crack escape in public. It was the first time their realities collided without masks. The millionaire frowned, visibly uncomfortable. He wasn't used to seeing weakness, especially not from someone who always silently fulfilled his role. "What happened?" he asked, his voice low but charged with authority. She tried to answer, but her throat closed. Her words tangled with her tears, as if the world were conspiring to keep her invisible. For a few seconds, only the sound of her ragged breathing filled the space. He slowly lowered himself, a rare gesture for someone who always looked down on everything. "Talk to me," he said more softly. Those three simple words sounded like an unexpected invitation, almost impossible coming from his mouth. There was something strange in his eyes, not pity but curiosity, as if, for the first time, he saw not a secretary, but a person with a story. This almost imperceptible change made her heart race in a confused way. She took a deep breath, trying to regain her strength. She wanted to push him away, but at the same time she felt a silent longing to be heard. Through sobs, she could only say, "They left me there, like I was nothing." The millionaire looked away for a moment, as if that sentence had struck deeper than he cared to admit. The silence that followed was heavy, but different, not empty, but charged with questions he'd never asked himself. And it was in that forgotten hallway, faced with the tears he tried to hide, that his world began to change. Not because of a negotiation, not because of $1 million contract, but because of something I never expected to find, the raw truth of humanity. The silence in the hallway seemed to stretch for miles, heavy and suffocating. The millionaire remained there, crouched before her, trying to find words he'd never needed to use. There was something rare in his eyes, not haste, not coldness, but a strange hesitation. For the first time, he didn't seem to have complete control of the scene. She looked away, staring at the cracks in the wall, as if she could hide there. The tears still fell, insistent, smearing the makeup she no longer bothered to fix. Within her, a conflict grew. Speak out and expose herself, or remain silent and remain invisible. For years he had grown accustomed to keeping his pain silent. I shouldn't be here like this," she murmured, her voice breaking. He tilted his head, confused, his expression less rigid than usual. "Here, what?" he asked. It was then that she lifted her weary face, not challenging, just weary. Like someone who matters so little that she can be left alone at a table without anyone noticing. The millionaire took a deep breath, as if those words struck him with unexpected force. It wasn't common to be confronted with fragility, much less from someone who had always performed their role in silence. There was something disarming about that confession, something that made him question his own way of life. For the first time, he had no ready answer. She tried to laugh, but the sound came out broken, closer to a sob. "It's funny, isn't it? I spend hours organizing schedules, reports, planning every detail. But when I finally get the chance to show something, I'm just the empty chair no one notices." Her hands shook, as if each word released years of pent-up frustration. He watched her silently, but there was an almost invisible shift in his gaze. The Iron Man, accustomed to controlling everything, now seemed vulnerable. There was discomfort, but also a recognition he didn't want to acknowledge. Her words echoed within him, stirring memories he'd rather keep buried. "I just wanted a chance," she continued, her voice trembling, but growing firmer with each sentence. "I just wanted someone to see that I can be more than just polished reports or timely emails." It was a simple request, but it carried enormous weight. For the first time, she was allowing herself to show who she truly was. The millionaire looked away, unable to bear the weight of those words. Surrounded by wealth and power, he suddenly felt small before such a stark truth. He thought of all the lonely dinners, the empty applause, the contracts that never filled his emptiness. It was as if a mirror had been held up to him. She took a deep breath, and for a moment her trembling stopped. The shadowy corridor no longer seemed just a hiding place, but the stage for a revelation. The fear that had plagued her for years gave way to a strange sense of relief. For the first time, her voice hadn't been drowned out by the silence. She was being heard. And there, amidst tears and silence, the millionaire understood. That wasn't just his secretary's broken voice. It was also the echo of his own life, suffocated by appearances and a loneliness he'd never acknowledged. An unlikely but inevitable encounter that was already beginning to turn his world upside down. Her words continued to echo in the hallway, even after silence returned. The millionaire remained motionless, as if he'd been hit by an invisible blow. It wasn't just her pain that bothered him, but the strange feeling of recognizing himself in her outburst. His gaze, once so steady and calculated, wavered. He saw in the secretary's fragility something he hadn't expected. A reflection of his own life, always surrounded by people, always the center of attention, but deep down, alone. A void hidden behind contracts and achievements. As she wiped away the tears with the back of her hand, he remembered nights of signing endless paperwork, returning to a quiet penthouse and dining alone with a breathtaking view, but with no one to share it with. The echo of loneliness rang out identically. He said nothing, but inside he felt a growing pressure. Like a cruel mirror, her every word forced him to see truths he'd been avoiding. He discovered then that he wasn't just a spectator to her pain. He was part of that story, and not just as a leader. The secretary lowered her face, still embarrassed, unaware of the intensity with which she was being observed. Had she known the impact her words were having, she might have kept quiet. But the millionaire, accustomed to controlling narratives, now found himself hostage to one he could not manipulate. For a moment, he almost reached out to wipe away her tears. But he stopped mid-gesture, hesitating. He couldn't tell if it was compassion or fear of getting too close to something that would stir up old wounds. Just the thought of it made him vulnerable. She sighed deeply, trying to regain control of her voice. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have said anything," she murmured. He interrupted her firmly this time. "No, you should have." It was the first sentence that sounded less like a boss and more like a human being. Those brief words hung in the air, carrying an unexpected weight. It was as if, for a second, the corridor walls had witnessed the birth of something rare, an invisible link between two worlds that should never intersect. The millionaire took a deep breath and looked up, trying to regain his mask of indifference. But it was too late. He knew he had seen too much, felt too much. And once someone sees the reflection of their own loneliness in another person, there's no going back. In that moment, he realized that his impeccable, untouchable life was nothing more than fragile glass. All it took was one encounter, a few tears, and a broken voice to reveal what had always been hidden. Behind the powerful millionaire, there was just a man tired of feeling invisible himself. That night, the millionaire returned home quieter than ever. The driver dropped him off at the entrance to his imposing penthouse, but as he walked through the glass doors, he felt no relief. Only an emptiness that seemed to echo even louder within the marble walls. As he walked through the spacious hall, his eyes lingered on details he'd always overlooked. The giant dining table, untouched for months. The expensive paintings that meant nothing to him. The bottles of wine opened only to impress business associates. Everything seemed like a stage, not life. He sat in his favorite armchair and let his tie slip around his neck. For the first time in years, he couldn't lose himself in the reports on his desk. Every page, every number, every contract seemed meaningless. The secretary's words echoed between the cold lines. He remembered how many times he'd spent sleepless nights on her. Memos redone, spreadsheets revised 3 or 4 times, phone calls answered in the wee hours of the morning. He'd always believed it was natural. She was there to serve. But he'd never considered the human cost. One specific memory came back strongly. Her birthday, just a few months ago. He'd noticed the balloon forgotten in her bag, but he'd still made her work late. He didn't ask anything, didn't wish her a happy birthday. In that moment, he realized he was carrying guilt he'd never acknowledged. The millionaire stood and walked to the living room mirror. He adjusted his hair, as he did before important meetings, but he couldn't hold his own gaze. The reflection before him seemed like a stranger, someone surrounded by power but hiding behind an eternal mask. For a moment, he considered calling one of his partners, just to distract himself from the routine. But he couldn't. He felt like if he talked about business now, he'd be running away again. And running away no longer seemed possible after what he'd seen in her eyes. She leaned against the glass of the panoramic window, gazing out at the illuminated city. Thousands of lit windows, each with its own story. How many people inside felt invisible like she did? How many hid their pain behind professional smiles, as he did? A strange weight settled on his shoulders. For the first time, he admitted to himself, it wasn't just his secretary who carried the burden of invisibility. He too lived behind a mask, polished and perfect, but unable to reveal who he truly was. And in that nighttime silence, the millionaire realized that the life he had built with so much effort might just be a fragile fortress. All it took was an unexpected confession to shatter the walls of this illusion. The question that remained was, would he have the courage to tear down the mask? The next morning, the office looked the same as always. Spotless hallways, desks with phones on, the sound of keyboards filling the air. But to him, everything was different. Every detail now seemed charged with a meaning that had previously gone unnoticed. Upon entering her office, he found her already working, as if nothing had happened. Her hair neatly tied back, her expression serious, her reports stacked neatly. Only her eyes betrayed the weariness of a sleepless night. Still, she smiled slightly, fulfilling her role. He watched her for a few seconds, silent before speaking. I need you to leave the reports for later, he said unexpectedly. She looked up, surprised, uncomprehending. Let's go outside for a moment. It was the first time his order hadn't sounded like an imposition. She hesitated, looking around as if expecting a trick. Never in all her years had he interrupted her work. But sir, we still have the 10 o'clock meeting. He interrupted her firmly but gently. The meeting can wait, not you. The words hung in the air, almost impossible to believe. The secretary adjusted her glasses, trying to compose herself. She didn't know if she was about to be reprimanded or recognized. And in that moment, her heart beat faster than it should have. They walked together through the corridors, drawing curious glances from the employees. No one understood what was happening. To everyone, that man had always been distant, inaccessible. But there he was, side by side with his secretary, breaking invisible protocols. When they reached the elevator, she tried to insist, please, you don't have to do this, I'm fine. But he just shook his head. You spent so much time taking care of everything. Today, it's my turn to take care of you. Her tone wasn't that of a boss, but of someone finally seeing. The elevator descended slowly, reflecting the two silently against the stainless steel walls. He, imposing yet restless. She, discreet, yet with a strength that overflowed even amidst her fragility. It was as if, for a few moments, they were equals. When the doors opened, the brightness of the street enveloped them. The noise of the city. The frenetic movement. Everything contrasted with the unexpected calm that surrounded them. He took a deep breath, as if emerging from an invisible prison. And it was there, at the exit of the building, that the millionaire took his first real step outside the cold routine he had built. For the first time, he wasn't thinking about business, contracts, or status. He thought only of extending his hand, and finally, someone would take it. The two walked through the busy streets, out of step with the hustle and bustle of executives rushing past. He, in his impeccable suit, seemed out of place amid the popular storefronts. She, still surprised, tried to understand the reason for this unexpected pause in the middle of the workday. He stopped in front of a small coffee shop, nothing compared to the fancy restaurants he frequented. "Let's go in here," he said, opening the door for her. The smell of freshly brewed coffee and warm bread filled the air, replacing the artificial perfume of the meeting rooms. They sat at a simple table near the window. The secretary adjusted her glasses nervously, unsure of what to expect. The millionaire, for the first time in years, seemed relaxed. He ordered 2 coffees without looking at the extensive menu, as if he only wanted the basics. The silence between them was short-lived. He looked her straight in the eye and asked, "What are your dreams?" Her eyes widened in surprise. No one had ever asked that question in the office. They always just wanted deadlines, reports, and results, never her true essence. She took a deep breath, staring at the cup. "I wanted to grow, to show that I can create, that I have my own ideas. But the fear of not being noticed always holds me back. Sometimes I feel like I was born to be just background." Her voice trembled but didn't break. The millionaire listened in silence, but not with the cold silence of before. It was an attentive, almost reverent listening, as if every word carried weight. He remembered when he, too, had dreams, before they were swallowed up by the cruel pace of business. "And you?" she ventured, surprised by her own boldness. "What do you dream about, sir?" He took a deep breath, leaning back in his chair. He remained silent for a few seconds, until the answer came. "Dreaming is something I stopped doing a long time ago." There was a sadness hidden in his words, as if they came from a forgotten place. The secretary felt a tightness in her chest. For the first time, she wasn't just seeing her millionaire boss. She saw a tired man, carrying alone the weight of never being able to fail. The conversation, light and painful at the same time, flowed like never before. They weren't boss and employee. They were just 2 people, sharing their truths between sips of bitter coffee and the distant noise of the street. The simplicity of the moment felt precious. And in that modest cafe, outside the rehearsed scripts of corporate life, something changed. It was as if they had both discovered that, behind the masks, there were 2 human beings with deferred dreams. And this recognition brought them closer than any contract. Late afternoon fell quickly, tinging the city with orange hues. They were still talking, oblivious to the passing of time. The secretary was startled when she glanced at her watch. "It's already night," she murmured. He smiled, a rare smile on his face. "Then let's continue, but somewhere else." Instead of hailing a driver or choosing a fancy restaurant, he guided her through simpler streets. They stopped in front of a small neighborhood cantina, the smell of fresh pasta wafting from the door. She hesitated, surprised. It wasn't the kind of place she'd imagined seeing him. They entered. The atmosphere was cozy, with checkered tablecloths and yellow lights hanging from the ceiling. Families chatted loudly, children laughed amid the clatter of silverware. There, he seemed less like a millionaire and more like an ordinary man seeking peace. They sat at a table near the wall, and the waiter brought warm homemade bread. He broke it with his own hands and offered her a piece, a simple but unexpected gesture. The secretary couldn't help but smile shyly, perhaps the first sincere smile of the day. While they waited for their food, they talked about trivial things, old songs, childhood memories, stories that would never fit into a meeting. With each sentence, the formality between them dissolved. It was as if the weight of the office had been lifted outside. When the dishes arrived, steaming pasta, simple but delicious, the millionaire let out a spontaneous laugh as he got covered in sauce. His secretary laughed too, and for once the sound didn't seem out of place. It was human, warm, and effortless. He watched her between bites, struck by the lightness that emerged amidst her vulnerability. She was no longer the efficient secretary he knew, but a woman full of life, hidden beneath years of discipline and silence. And that enchanted him. She, in turn, saw something new in him. Not the strict boss, but a man who knew how to listen and even joke. The usual formality had given way to an unexpected complicity, as if the dinner were a secret just for them, kept within four simple walls. Outside, the night continued its rhythm, but inside the small cantina, time seemed to stand still. There were no contracts, reports, or social pressures. There were just two people rediscovering the value of presence, listening and sharing. And between bites and discreet laughter, the millionaire realized something he didn't dare admit. He hadn't felt so alive in a long time. That night, so unlikely and far from his routine, was already etched in his memory as a turning point. The night ended with discreet farewells, but the silence inside the car seemed to scream. The millionaire stared out the window as the city flashed by in flashes of light. The image of the secretary laughing naturally in the cafeteria lingered in his mind, like an echo impossible to erase. When he got home, he couldn't follow his usual routine. The clock was almost midnight, but instead of reviewing documents, he paced restlessly around the living room, trying to understand his own restlessness. Something inside him was conflicted, and no spreadsheet could explain it. He wondered if he was confusing compassion with something greater. Had it simply been pity when he saw her cry? Or was there a connection there he'd always ignored, but now insisted on revealing itself? The more he thought, the more dangerous the path his thoughts were taking him seemed. He sat on the edge of the bed, slowly removing the expensive watch from his wrist. For years, he had believed feelings were distractions that weakened, yet he remembered the sincerity in her eyes, the simple words that had pierced his armor, and it frightened him. Across town, the secretary also lay awake. She couldn't believe what she'd experienced. The dinner, the conversation, the glances, everything seemed surreal, as if it were a parallel reality where, for a few hours, she wasn't invisible, and her heart raced just remembering it. She tried to convince herself it was just gratitude, that she was simply surprised by her boss's unexpected gesture. But deep down, she knew there was something more, something that could be dangerous if confused with hope. And yet, she couldn't suppress that feeling. As they both silently wrestled with thoughts they dared not acknowledge, dawn broke. Outside, the city slept, but within them, a whirlwind stirred. Neither of them dared to name what was emerging. The millionaire lay down, but sleep wouldn't come. In his mind, he kept asking himself the same question. What if he was about to cross a line he shouldn't have? His entire life he'd built walls to avoid vulnerability. Now, one night was all it took for everything to begin to crumble. She, in turn, lay down, hugging her notebook. In it, for the first time in months, she wrote a few lines about her dreams, not for a presentation, not for a report, just to remind herself that she still existed. And in that silent dawn, without knowing it, the two were connected by the same doubt. Were they just living a passing moment, or about to begin something that would change their lives forever? The following days at the office took on a different rhythm. There were no declarations, no explicit changes, but small gestures slipped by. His gaze lingered a few seconds longer on his secretary. Hers, previously always submissive, now held a new glow, as if she were beginning to believe in herself. It didn't take long for the hallways to notice. Quiet murmurs began to emerge during coffee breaks. "Have you noticed how different he looks?" whispered one employee. "And how she's been smiling more?" added another. Every curious glance turned into silent judgment. During a meeting, one of the partners made a caustic joke. "I see your secretary has been getting a lot of attention lately." The entire room laughed, but the millionaire remained serious, ignoring the provocation. She, however, felt the blood rush to her face in embarrassment. In the elevator, the comments echoed in hushed whispers. Some said she was taking advantage. Others suggested he'd lost focus. Each word was like a weight weighing down on her shoulders, threatening to shatter what little confidence she'd gained. At one point, the secretary entered the break room, and the voices immediately fell silent. The sudden silence said more than any sentence could. Her heart raced, and for a moment she considered dropping everything, escaping the suffocating atmosphere. He felt the pressure too, but in a different way. His partners watched him suspiciously, as if any gesture were a sign of weakness. "You need to save face," one of them commented after a meeting. But he was no longer sure that image was all that mattered. That night she confessed to herself in front of the mirror, "I'm scared. Not of the boss, not of the relationship, but of the constant judgment. Afraid of losing the only chance she had to be recognized." And yet deep inside, there was something that kept her from giving up. The millionaire, in his silent penthouse, was also reflecting. He knew he was at a crossroads. Either he continued to nurture his image as an untouchable man, or he accepted that he was about to embark on a path no one would approve of. The dilemma consumed him silently. The next day, when they met eyes in the hallway, they didn't exchange words. But in that moment, they both understood. The world was watching them. And perhaps from that point on, any choice would come at a price they couldn't avoid. And so it was that, without realizing it, the two began to carry not only their own doubts, but also the cruel weight of others' gazes. External judgment became yet another obstacle in a story that was already destined to blossom into something greater. It was night when he discreetly called her into his office. The office was already empty, with only the city illuminated by the windows as a witness. The secretary entered, unsure, but noticed something different in the air. His gaze wasn't that of a boss, it was that of someone about to fall apart. He walked to the bookshelf, ran his fingers through the books as if gathering courage, and then said, "You must be wondering why I am like this." His voice was lower than usual, almost a whisper. She didn't answer. She just waited, sensing she would hear something no one else knew. "I wasn't always like this." He turned, staring at his own shadow in the glass. "There was a time when I believed in dreams, in plans made together. I had someone, but I lost them." The words hung heavy, as if each one opened an old wound. The secretary felt her heart sink. He never spoke about his personal life, never left any room for comment. "She believed in me more than I believed in myself. But I lost her to a swift, cruel illness. After that, all I had left was work." His voice trailed off and he looked away. Every contract signed, every dollar earned. It was just a way to fill the silence of the empty house. He sat in the armchair, his shoulders slumped, as if carrying the weight of years of loneliness. And to avoid feeling it, I hid behind masks. Masks that made me too cold. She approached slowly, tears welling up without her realizing it. She sat across from him, her hands clasped in her lap. "I didn't know," she murmured. He gave her a sad smile. "No one knows. I won't let them." For the first time, she confessed her fragility. Silence fell, but it wasn't awkward. It was a welcoming silence, as if the walls of the room finally breathed a new truth. The secretary, in a low voice, simply said, "You didn't have to carry everything alone." And for a moment, he believed her. He looked at her differently, as if her presence was more than professional support. It was a living reminder that there was still humanity amidst the concrete and steel he'd built around himself. For the first time in years, he didn't feel completely alone. The confession seemed to have left him lighter, but also more vulnerable. He knew he had exposed the most painful part of his story, and there was no going back. From that moment on, their relationship would never be the same. And without either of them saying it out loud, something became clear that night. Shared pain creates bonds stronger than any contract. It was the beginning of a connection that defied all logic, and that would change everything that came after. The following week, the entire office seemed to breathe with anticipation. A massive contract was about to be signed, one that would catapult the firm to an international level. The partners talked of astronomical sums, travel, and prestige. But for the millionaire, There was something different about this deal. The document called for drastic cuts, staff reductions, longer working hours, less room for human error. To him, it was just another strategy, until he heard her name mentioned on the list of potential layoffs. His blood ran cold. During the meeting, one of the partners coolly explained, "She's efficient, yes, but replaceable. We need more aggressive people who don't get too involved." The words echoed like venom. For the first time, the millionaire realized how the cogs of the system could crush lives without remorse. He tried to focus on the numbers, but the image of her came back to him, alone in the hallway, crying, laughing in the simple cafeteria, confessing her fears honestly. It was impossible to reduce it all to statistics on a spreadsheet. The conflict grew inside him like a storm. The partners noticed his hesitation. "You have to be firm," one of them insisted. "You can't let personal ties get in the way. This contract is our chance to consolidate power. Feelings don't pay the bills." The phrase, delivered arrogantly, sounded like a punch. That night he returned home, but the penthouse seemed even emptier. He walked through the living room, lit only by the city lights, and realized every achievement, every contract, every award, nothing had real value when it was accompanied by silence and loss. The dilemma consumed him. If he accepted, he would be applauded by his partners and strengthened in the market, but he would betray the only true connection he had rediscovered. If he refused, he would risk everything: power, prestige, even his own image as an unbeatable man. Standing at the window, he watched the rain run down the glass. The drops seemed to echo his incessant doubt. Should he follow the path he'd always trod or dare something different? His heart raced as if he were a callow youth, not the respected tycoon. The storm outside seemed to mirror the one inside. Lightning streaked across the sky while thunder echoed, as if the universe was shouting the urgency of his choice. And he knew he couldn't delay it much longer. Tomorrow, in front of his partners, he would have to decide. And there, in the silence broken only by the rain, the millionaire understood that this was no ordinary contract. He was facing the greatest challenge of his life, choosing between continuing to be the man in the masks or finally being truly human. The meeting room was packed. Partners lined up, documents spread across the glass table, million-dollar projections reflected on the screen. The air smelled of strong coffee and tension. Everyone waited for just one word from the millionaire: yes or no. He leafed through the contract in silence, but he didn't see numbers. He saw faces. The secretaries especially loomed between the lines like an insistent ghost. He remembered her broken voice, her confession, the strength he'd discovered behind her fragility. One of the partners broke the silence. "This is the opportunity of a lifetime. We can't hesitate." Another added, "The market needs cool-headed leaders. That's what keeps us on top." The words pierced him like razors, but they no longer held the same power. He closed the folder slowly, resting his hands on the table. His heart was racing, but his voice was firm. "I'm not signing." The silence that followed was deafening. Some laughed, believing it to be a joke. Others frowned in disbelief. "Are you crazy?" one of the partners snapped. "This contract guarantees our future for decades." He held her gaze, never looking away. "What good is a future of numbers if we have to crush people to get there? It's not weakness to care, it's strength." The sentence reverberated like thunder. For the first time, it wasn't the cold millionaire speaking, but a man who had chosen to shed his masks. His partners protested, argued, raised their voices, but he remained unmoved. Outside, employees watched expectantly. The secretary, unaware of what was happening, reviewed reports with a restless heart. Deep down, she sensed something important was about to change. The meeting ended in a furious atmosphere. Partners stormed out, slamming doors in outrage. But he remained seated, breathing deeply, as if he had just weathered a hurricane. For the first time in years, he felt truly free. He stood up, walked to the meeting room window, and looked out over the city. The storm had passed, and the sky was beginning to lighten. It was as if the world outside reflected what was happening inside him. A new beginning was dawning. And in that instant he realized, Losing contracts might mean losing status, but gaining himself was a victory he'd never experienced. For the first time, the millionaire didn't just see figures on the horizon. He saw the possibility of being human again. The office hallway looked different that morning. Employees whispered, partners avoided eye contact, but he walked steadily. The millionaire who had always donned the armor of indifference now wore a different expression. Lightness. It was the weight of decision that finally set him free. Entering the secretary's office, he found her surprised, standing up quickly. Before she could speak, he said, "The contract. I turned it down." Her eyes widened in disbelief. But it was the company's biggest project. He smiled slightly. Not every price is worth it. She felt her legs weaken. She'd never imagined he'd be capable of giving up power on principle for someone like her. "You didn't have to do this for me," she murmured. He leaned closer, serious. "I didn't do it just for you. I did it for myself, too." It was time for a change. They left the office together, facing curious and judgmental glances, but no comments mattered. For the first time, they walked side by side, not as boss and subordinate, but as two people who chose to truly see each other. On the street, the city continued its chaotic rhythm. Cars, horns, haste. But for them, time seemed to slow down. "And now?" she asked uncertainly. He replied without hesitation. "Now, we start again, the right way, with humanity." She smiled, a shy smile, but full of hope. Her heart beat faster, as if she'd been invited to rewrite her own story. For the first time, she didn't feel invisible. She was seen, heard, recognized, and that changed everything. He in turn discovered a freedom that money never bought. He realized he didn't need masks to be respected. True respect came from courage, empathy, and choices that honored more than contracts. They walked together to the corner, and he, almost without realizing it, let out a light laugh. She laughed too, and in that instant they understood. The future was uncertain, but it no longer mattered. They had found something more valuable than numbers. They had found each other. The millionaire looked at the tall buildings, at the city he had always associated with power, and thought, "The world hasn't changed. I have." And in that simple thought, everything seemed different, as if life had turned upside down to reveal its true face. And so ends this story, a reminder that sometimes what truly transforms lives isn't a great fortune, but the courage to see the invisible. If this story touched you, like it, subscribe to the channel and share in the comments. What was the moment your life turned upside down?